Well, that's no good. Just checking my phone, and it's still 9 weeks until spring turkey season, so I guess I'll do a couple more of these reloading press videos. Hopefully you guys are still interested. Weather outside's still yucky, so let's hang out and do a couple more of these. What I've got going on here is a CV Schmitt Model 12. This was the brainchild of a fellow named Konstantin Schmidt. Man, they just don't make names like that anymore, do they? I have no idea what the V stands for. Probably something pretty cool. But Konstantin Schmidt lived in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and that's where he actually manufactured these presses. The patent for this press is really cool. I actually tracked it down from the U.S. Patent Office here, and it has all the technical drawings for it and text descriptions of everything, and I'll stick some snapshots of those at the end of the video here if anybody wants to look at it. But it's a pretty complicated piece of equipment, particularly for the time. This was patented in 1925, and I know this one is a little bit later of an example. There were a few earlier variations that had a little bit different style in a couple of pieces here. But it seems like production of these presses ended around World War II, somewhere in there. I don't know the exact date. And there's actually a couple other models that were produced. This one is maybe the more common of them. This is the only one I've ever been able to snag at a decent price. There's a couple of other variants that are bigger that just people have asked ridiculous prices for. So again, you know, my budget's my limiting factor here. This one isn't small on its own. It's well over a foot long, something like 15 inches long, I believe. Weighs about 10 pounds, has a big solid cast iron base on it. So it's a beefy piece of equipment. This one I have is for 30-06, and I've got a empty cartridge here. I'll show you how this works. And it's a 2-die setup. So the die that's set up in here now, this is the depriming and sizing die, and then this is the seating die. Unfortunately, this appears to have been modified at some later date. The original setup, and if you look at the drawings and the pictures of a few other ones that I've found, are a little bit different, but it's still functional. It's actually marked on here 30-06. These dies, it's obvious somebody has cleaned them up in the past. There was some pretty strong pitting in here, particularly on the resizing die, and somebody has cleaned it up, whoever had it before me. But it still works. So what I'd like to do is run through how this thing actually functions, and then talk about a couple of little quirks and speculate on maybe why it didn't have such a long history. So I'm going to bring the camera in here close and we'll go through each of the functions. So I hope you all enjoyed that overview of the entire process of how this actually works. I say that because I just went through the entire process from resizing, depriming, repriming, and seating a bullet, and my GoPro didn't record any of that. So I'm going to go through it all again. So we have several functions on here that are designed to make this pretty smooth. Just like any loading operation, first process is generally to deprime, resize, and that's what this die accomplishes. We're going to reprime. This has a really nifty automatic priming mechanism on here. And then we're going to swap over to this die to seat our bullets. So I have a couple of pieces of brass here and another one over here. These have been lubed up, and I'm going to use these to show you how this works. So we'd take our empty piece of brass, slide it over into our sizing decapping die. Now what we're going to do is, as we tip this down, we're going to move our handle forward and we're going to engage the shell holder that's been placed in here. So you just hold your tongue just right, slide this forward, we're going to capture that in the shell holder and then move the handle forward. I'm feeling resistance as it's sizing, and watch right in here, and it's going to pop that primer out. Coming forward, primer is getting pushed out, and now it's popped out. Cam this all the way forward. That primer has actually dropped through a hole in the base of the press, and now is underneath here. So we'll tip this back down. Now as we pull it back, we're going to have to hold the die down. That's why a spring. As we pull it back, I'll let it flip up real quick to show you what I'm looking at. There's a roller cam on the back of here that's going to engage this little ramp and activate this automatic priming mechanism. So what I have here, I've got a spent primer. I'm going to drop it down the primer magazine here. Slid down in there. Now watch as I bring this back. This slide is going to shuttle that primer over into here, and then this rod here will emerge through the hole and press the new primer in. Once we do this, I'm going to do it again on another piece of brass so you can see it actually transfer in there. So I'm going to re-engage, start pulling this back. We're pulling the case out. Now here, the primer slide is starting to cam over. I'm going to let this flip up again real quick. Here is our new primer. It's going to slide it over, and now you can see right here is the primer punch, and we bring it back and it's going to seat the new primer into the base of our case. Lift up the handle a little bit, this will spring up, and we now have a resized and reprimed piece of brass. So I'm going to bring you in a little bit closer here and show you the priming mechanism up close as it operates. I've retrieved the dead primer from underneath here, and I'm going to feed it down into the magazine from the top. And I think you could fit, I haven't actually measured it, but I think you can fit at least 50 primers into this slide. So I'm going to pull this primer tube out, and you're going to see that our primer is setting here. And as I move the handle, this cams over and this primer slide grabs the primer. And so now this would be on the forward stroke while we are depriming and sizing. So the slide has moved over, grabbed a new primer, and then on the back stroke, or the downstroke, we're going to engage the cam on the back here again. The slide is being pushed over. There's a spring providing tension for it over here. We have shuttled the new primer over. Now it's in contact with the primer seating rod coming out the back, and this is where we'd push it into the new case. Obviously there's nothing there, so it just fell out again. But that's how the primer slide operation works. So the next step in the operation is obviously filling our cartridge with our choice of powder and seating the bullet, completing the reloading process. To do that, we're going to have to swap out this decapping and resizing die for the seating die. And like I mentioned, this die has been modified from the original configuration. This brass piece has been added on the back by somebody that actually machined it very, very well. But this is not the original configuration from what I can tell. I think the original one, there was a square block that would fall in the back of here, and then this stem would index onto that. But this is set up so I can remove this bolt. There's a new nut on there. The original one had been lost at some point. Pull this bolt out. The resizing die comes out. We'll set that to the side. And now the seating die will slide right over top of this bolt. And you'll notice there's actually two locations here that have been milled into my noisy little dog just came stomping down the stairs. That's the jingling and snuffing and stomping. So, good job, dog. So this will now fit over top of this bolt. And notice there's two locations here. Longer cartridges like 30-06 rifle cartridges would use the furthest back position. Shorter pistol cartridges would use the forward position. So we're going to set it in the back one there. Move our handle all the way back and set the die down. So this is where it starts to get a little bit complicated for a horizontal press. Next step would obviously be measure your powder out, charge your case, and now we have our bullet. Well, we need to set our bullet in here, but since this is horizontal, what we have to do is lift the die off of there and then slide the whole assembly inside there, hoping that we don't tip all our powder out. I'm going to qualify this and say I actually haven't messed around with setting this die up, so I really don't know what's going to happen when I seat the bullet in there. But in theory, this is going to seat the bullet. So we have our bullet and our new cartridge filled with powder. We're going to set that in here, put it down, and now we have to get it to set where it will catch the shell holder there. I'll bring the handle forward, compress that, and that will seat the bullet. Now we can retract the handle. It will start to pull the bullet out, the new casing. We can lift that out, and there is our reloaded cartridge with some success. Like I said, I haven't actually played around with setting this up, so it shoved the bullet in there, but notice it did attempt to crimp. I just don't have the seating depth and all that stuff dialed in. That would be done by adjusting all of this. You back this nut off, and now you can adjust the seating die in and out. There's another nut there. So that's how you'd adjust your seating depth, crimp, all that good stuff. So there's the overall function of how you would reload a cartridge using this. So one thing I always wonder about on these older tools is, why did they stop making them? Why did this die out? And I don't always have a good answer for that. It's obvious that Mr. Schmidt was a pretty genius inventor. There's a lot of, this is a complicated tool, right? There's a lot that goes into it. If you look through the patent drawings, there's a lot going on here. This is a very built piece of equipment. So obviously it wasn't, you know, a cheap throwaway item. Took time to manufacture. There's a lot of craftsmanship that went into this. So why did it die off? And I don't know. There's, like I mentioned before, there's a couple of other tools that Mr. Schmidt developed. This is actually one of the smaller ones. There's a couple other presses that are just enormous beasties of a thing, and they're really hard to find, and if you do find them, people want money for them. So this is the only one I have. I would like to track down some of the other ones, but this is the one that I have. So, you know, what's going on here? Why didn't this catch on? And there's a couple of things that I can think of. One is there's a few written accounts of how notoriously hard this Mr. Schmidt was to get a hold of. It seems like he did a lot of his work out of his own house. He did have a storefront and a shop where these were manufactured, but a lot of things were administrative items, seemed to be have his home address on them, and apparently it was very hard to get a hold of him for anything. And so maybe that was part of it. These obviously weren't cheap items. I wish I knew the actual sale price, but they're marketed toward a very niche crowd, people that had the money to do this in a time where, you know, money spent toward this kind of hobby wasn't a real priority. This is, you know, pre-World War II item, and so there wasn't a lot of luxury, you know, discretionary spending money at that time. So this wouldn't have been something that just everybody could have went out and bought. So maybe that's a couple of reasons. Another obvious one is that it's complicated, right? There's a lot going on here. People like simple tools, and so maybe that was some of it. The horizontal design is a little bit quirky, but you know, that couldn't be the only killer of it. I've actually got another horizontal press here. I actually have it mounted vertically, but this is the Belding and Mull, and they sold a lot of these. These are pretty popular. You can find these kind of all over the place. So obviously the horizontal aspect wasn't a real killer. Just actually be run like this. This one you can actually run vertically too if you want. But you know, note this is a lot simpler, smaller tool. So maybe that had some of it. Maybe the Belding and Mull kind of pushed them out of the market. I don't know. My real suspicion though is, if I pull this guy over here, this is a Pacific, turn it around so you can see, move this before I actually break it. This is a Pacific C style press. This was patented in 1933, so just you know, less than a decade after the Schmidt, and really it accomplishes all the same functions, right? It's not as mechanically intricate, there's not as many processes going on, but you can still prime on the machine using the primer arm. It accepts kind of what would become the standard dies. That's the 7, 8, 14 dies. So, you know, all the pieces were going to be interchangeable. Really simple piece of equipment. Obviously much less machining time into this. You still have a cast frame, but there's not all the other little pieces. So this was going to be a lot simpler and cheaper press for the masses, right? So anything the Schmidt could do, this could do arguably equally as well. It doesn't have the automatic primer mechanism, but it can do everything else pretty much the same for what's going to be a fraction of the cost, because we have much less time and money invested in materials and manufacturing process. Pacific also being a, you know, large name company at the time. So, you know, I don't know ultimately what was the demise of the Schmidt company, but probably a couple of things. The, you know, kind of conclusion is it was pretty neat piece of equipment. I think it's the oldest press that I have, or one of the oldest, and by far the most intricate of those old presses. So it's a fascinating piece, and I hope to see more examples of that sometime. If anybody does come across any of the other variants for sale, reasonable price, or again want to, you know, donate them, love to know. They're really hard to find. There's a couple of them out there on the big auction site, and they want a crazy amount of money for them. Nothing that I'm going to be ever willing to pay for them. So there's other interesting Schmidt tools out there. So thanks for watching all about the Model 12 Schmidt. I also like to thank Ken with the Antique Reloading Tools Collectors Association for providing me with some background history and some literature. The kind of association publication on the Model 12. A great read, so thank you, Ken, very, very much. If you do see this video, I greatly appreciate it. I know a lot of people went and put a lot more time into researching this than I did, and I relied heavily on your information, so thank you very much for all that. If anybody does have any more info, if I've made mistakes, love for you to point them out for me. So thank you guys for suffering through my attempts to describe the Model 12 and its various really cool functions. So I do appreciate you guys watching. For my next video, I'd like some input on what you guys think would be interesting to cover next. So I'll give you two options here and hope you help me decide. We can either talk about the RCBS green machine and some of its quirks. I have a fondness for this machine. Pretty neat machine from the 80s. Or we can go back in time again and talk about this really cool Ballard that I just found. So please let me know what you think. I've got more of them to come, but these are two that I'm kind of interested in right now. So help me decide what I want to do next. Comment down below. And again, thank you guys very, very much for watching.